Okay, good morning, everyone. How are you doing?
Morning,
Good
Mike.
morning. Morning, Mike.
Morning.
Morning, Paul.
Morning.
I'm pleased to say that we've got Paul Allen here today, who is one of the chief executive team. And I believe, Paul, your title is now, I think it's a new one, Director of Infrastructure and Sustainability.
Yes, Mike, that's correct.
Yes. Before we get started, I think today we'd had a number of questions that fall under Paul's remit and those of his teams, and we were keen to get some definitive answers on them. So we've held back one or two questions for a couple of weeks to ask Paul directly. And I'm grateful for everybody being patient with that. But before we get started, I wondered, Paul, if you would be able just to talk a little bit in a very, very high level, what remit your teams cover.
Okay, thanks, Mike. The Directorate covers estates, facilities, e-health, procurement, infrastructure planning, and sustainability, climate emergency change, decarbonisation. So quite a lot in there. But how we look after buildings, putting up new buildings, planning for buying equipment, replacing equipment, all the digital IT, setting up contracts, making sure we've got steady supplies coming in, and a number of other things. But importantly, one of the big things as part of my portfolio now is around the sustainability and climate emergency agenda. So, as an anchor organisation, it's really important that we look at our targets in line with the government's aims set out around decarbonisation. So, that's things like moving away from fossil fuel vehicles to engineering plant that heats our buildings, moving away from oil and gas and things like that. So a cleaner, greener future and the targets set out in there. So that's quite a big part of my agenda that I've got at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I'm glad you said that because I would never have remembered it all. It's a massive directorate. So, and we're also, and I know Caroline agrees with this. We're also really grateful to Paul and his team who've helped with a lot of the action that we've taken. Following up on some of the questions that have come in through the Q&A. Some of them have been larger scale things like the announcement of the car parking review, but some have included some of the so-called small things like hot food vending machines in certain locations, installing shower seats, are just a couple of the examples I can think of over recent weeks. Caroline, I know I've heard you talk about the importance of getting those fundamentals right previously. Do you want to come in on that or anything else around Paul's directorate before we get into the questions?
Just really to say, so that I think Paul's work and the team that the huge team that he has working with him, we are utterly dependent on the services that Paul and his colleagues provide, and I don't think it's always that visible. And they tend to go around their work uh, pretty much because although there's patient facing colleagues, there's also colleagues who work in non-patient facing roles, but without them we absolutely just could not. There isn't a single service I don't believe we could deliver without Paul's colleagues being part of that pathway to be able to deliver it. So critically important. And in fact, this morning I'm in Cornhill, and Paul's going to come and meet me in after we've done this Q&A, and we're going to do a walk round just to chat through some of the challenges. Paul mentioned infrastructure, so we're going to chat through some of the challenges and the work that Paul and his colleagues are doing to address that. But really grateful. Clearly, Paul's got lots of time to twiddle his thumbs with the size of his job. So really grateful that he's taken the time to join us this morning, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. And before we get into the questions themselves that have been submitted, one of the running themes that we've had throughout the question and answers is about car parking, or vehicle parking, should I say, particularly around the Forester Hill site. But I think it's something that's equally applicable in other areas like Dr. Gray's. I know there's been the announcement recently that there's going to be a review of the car parking. Again, I called it car parking, the vehicle parking system. Is there anything that you're able to update on that, Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So we've been putting quite a bit of thought into this. So looking to start the review in the next 4 to 6 weeks. We just get through the summer. And the reason I say that is we want to make sure that we've got appropriate stakeholder engagement as part of that whole process and consulting, etc. So we've got a terms of reference set up, and that's looking at things like sustainability, I mentioned already, safe and equitable access for all staff groups, but also exploiting the potential of our automated number plate recognition system. So that's the ANPR. And basically what that means is, rather than having to raise the gates all the time, if we've got somebody that's known, then they rock up with their vehicle and it recognises their registration plate and it opens up the gate to allow you in. We've never really fully exploited that. So that's one of the things we're going to look at as well, and protecting parking and access for patients, visitors, and I have to say this, but being cost effective in maintaining the service. But finally, I would probably say taking on board learning that we've gained during the pandemic, I think, which is really important. Now, what we'll probably do is come up with what we think we require, but then how realistic is it to be able to achieve that? We've got to take all that into consideration, and it's got to be effective going forward. So, that's going to take a number of months, to be honest, and I would expect probably into the end of the current calendar year for that to be completed.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Do you want to add anything on that, Caroline, or will I crack on with the questions? No, I'll crack on then. As a man who likes motorcycles, I think you'll like the first question, Paul. That comes from Andy Chaffer, who is one of the clinical scientists. He's asked what provision is there at ARI for motorcycle parking specifically. He says that in his previous trust, there were quite a lot of dedicated parking bays for motorcycles, and it doesn't seem to be something that's given a priority at ARI. He's mentioned that making it easier for people to ride motorbikes rather than come in the car helps with emissions as well. Paul, will I come to you for that one?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Andy, for that question. It's a really good one. So I'll ask that to be that part of the review we're doing. It's not there, but you would have think, being a motorcyclist myself and a biker, I would have thought that I would have added that in. But no, it's a really useful one to get added in, so I'll ensure we'll do that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just nip through them. The next question comes from Fiona Black in the General Office at ARI. Fiona would like to know if there are any plans to improve access to staff toilet facilities in the purple zone. I think that comes in the context of there only being 2 disabled toilets at the moment in that area that are shared with patients and staff. And while she's pleased about the introduction of the new staff garden and the redevelopment of the boardroom in that area, it's increased footfall and put more pressure on being able to get into that toilet. Is that something either Caroline or Paul are aware of? Any plans around that?
I can maybe come in and answer that from my perspective. So I'm not aware of any plans. Obviously, the nature of the site changes on a year-by-year basis depending how we're using it and the flow through the hospital, etc. So if I'm getting my zones right, that's about the Rotunda area,
Yeah.
if I've got my zones right. Because I've been around so long, I still think of the old way of working all these new zones. So with the Rotunda area, I would suggest that, so there's no immediate plans, so I would suggest that, we need to look at that, but maybe through Estates colleagues and Nigel Firth as our Equality and Diversity Manager, maybe having that conversation about, has it changed? Do we need more toilets, etc. At the moment, I believe we're compliant until otherwise told that we're not. So perhaps we can look at it. I would suggest between Estates and our Equality and Diversity Manager, maybe have a conversation initially and take it from there.
Okay. The next question comes from one of our colleagues, Johnston Gray, who's a maintenance supervisor. Johnston would like to know if there are any plans to provide more bike lockers at the ARI site. He says there's no spare ones, and he believes the waiting list is 12 to 18 months at the moment. Again, he mentions how much being able to cycle to work would help meet the green transport strategy and help reduce emissions as well. again, I think that a lot of these questions are going to probably be for Paul, so it might be a relatively chilled out morning for you, Caroline, if
I'm
that's
quite
okay.
delighted. I've got my cup of tea in anticipation for Paul answering all the questions. Although I will just jump in and say, actually, I think this is a really important question. I was out and about last week and was asked twice by colleagues about additional locked bike space because that's why they weren't cycling to work at the moment.
Okay.
So thanks, Caroline and Mike. I'm happy to answer that. So really, really good question from Johnston Gray. So what I would say is that, there's a mention there about greener travel strategy, obvious. So we do have an active travel strategy in Grampian. It's currently in place. And that fits with the climate emergency ambitions that's laid out by the government around being greener and reducing carbon emissions. So active travel is something we're really positive about. And we do have an officer within the team that looks at that and promoting things. But it's actually quite a timely question. And the reason I say that is that our NHS Grampian Transportation Overview Group, and that's got a wide range of people, public health colleagues around there, as well as estates and wider service colleagues. But just recently at their last meeting, they've decided to do a survey of the current lockers we've got. So, as Johnston was saying, we've got that 12 to 18 month waiting list. The lockers we've got, are they being fully utilised? So to do a bit of a survey around that, could we free up any lockers where possible? And that review will then make recommendations to increase lockers should we feel that's needed. And previously, we were able to get grants and funds and what have you through various sort of greener bodies nationally. And we'll look at that also. But yeah, it's fairly topical, and I would have to say we're on it.
Okay, thank you. The next question is anonymous, and bearing in mind it's anonymous, I've condensed it a little bit because there were quite a few details in there that might have revealed who the person was. So I'll share some of those with Caroline and Paul off camera, but the colleague has stated that she'd previously contacted Caroline through the Q&A asking why there weren't enough laptops for staff, and Caroline's reply was that there were. The person's been back in touch now to say that unfortunately our manager states that her team don't have enough and that she can't work from home because of this. She feels there's an element of unfairness in this, and there's a concern, especially with the rise in travel costs. And she mentioned she's also not on a bus route. She's also mentioned, just as a general comment, Caroline, that we've had before, I think, about she's heard from various colleagues that they have been denied the opportunity to work from home for other reasons, and that she feels more clarity should be given and it shouldn't just be at a manager's discretion. Do you want to come in on that initially, Caroline, and maybe Paul will be able to help with some of the detail?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And so we spoke about a lot of those things before. So in regards to access to the right equipment to do your role effectively, there should be no barriers to that. What I recall saying in my response was about supply issues, and also, and Paul will tell you the figures because he quotes them regularly to me, the number of laptops that are in the system. So what I said was it shouldn't be a barrier to anybody working from home. There might be a slight delay because of supply chains, but actually if the decision was that what the individual and the service needs are to work from home, then we need to give you the right kit to do that. So I'll let Paul expand on that answer. In regards to the clear messaging of how we are changing, where colleagues who can have the choice to work from home, and remember that's not all colleagues, then it's a really interesting thing, and Paul and Tom are the executive leads around that. Not sure how glad they are that they stepped up for that now. It's pretty complex. And the reason it's complex is because we don't believe one size fits all. And when you try to individualise decisions based on principles, but when you try to individualise decisions and give the authority and the autonomy to teams to make the right decision for what their service needs and what those individuals needs, then people look at other people and they think, why are things not all the same? So it's an absolute balance of being person-centred, making sure we're maintaining service provision, and we're learning. Let's be honest, we're learning about how to do this. But again, Paul will speak in more detail around the work that we're doing to try and give clarity of messaging.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Caroline. So there's a few themes in there that Caroline's touched on. So if I can start with the laptop. So during the pandemic, yes, there was global challenges around microchips and what have you, and motherboards to get these devices out. That's getting better now. However, even with that in mind, what I would point out is that we've bought thousands of laptops during the pandemic. And to put that into perspective, if we've got, say, 17,000 staff that we recognise within NHS Grampian, we're probably about 10,500 desktop PCs and about 7,500 laptops. So we've got, in terms of devices, more than a one-to-one ratio to our staff. And through the Smarter Working programme board that myself and Tom, our exec leads around about that agenda, is that we're looking at, with our IT colleagues in eHealth, looking to see how often these devices are used. And we recognise that some of them are not used a lot. And we've got quite a large list of devices not being used. And we intend communicating with those individuals that own those devices to say, are they still using them? Because we'd like to free them up. Because I believe we do have enough devices and we need to free that up. So some kind of amnesty that we reach out to people and have that conversation. So I'm not going to quote the number, but it's a big number. So we want to go out and maybe as the pandemic's changed, there's been less use for those. But anyway, we want to free them up, liberate them, and get them out to staff that need them. And the bit about the working at home or hybrid working or work-based, that's the kind of key themes we're working around the Smarter Working programme. And what will be coming out soon is guidance, managers' guidance toolkit, if you like. They'll get to managers to, and this is the important bit, to support conversations between the manager and the member of staff. So any member of staff's got the right to come along and have a conversation under our policy around flexible working style. So that's nothing new. That was there pre-pandemic. But now we're going to put out that toolkit. It'll help that conversations. So we've all got a right to ask. It might not fit with the service, but the important thing is there's a conversation needs to take place. So guidance come out and help that soon.
Thanks a lot. I think that'll give some people a lot of reassurance. The next question, I'm conscious of time, so I'll just move on. The next question comes from an anonymous member of one of the admin teams. They would like to know what benefit there is to NHS Grampian in having all mail sent second class now. The colleague who's emailed works in a department that sends out a lot of appointment information to patients. And they've mentioned that people are struggling to get back to the team in time to confirm those appointments, and there are some pieces of information about medication that are shared through those letters that aren't always getting there in time as well. Is that something that you're aware of, Paul?
Yeah, so I'm aware that a number of years ago, and we're not alone here, all boards have been doing it, is looking at the exponential increase of mail getting sent out. And our treatment time guarantee and access and what have you means that we've got to be able to communicate with our patient citizens out there when we're looking to arrange appointments, etc. And each time, so if I get an appointment, for example, and it doesn't suit me, then I can call them and say, look, the clinic, and say that doesn't suit me, and get an alternative appointment. But the way the system's set up, and it needs to give you another letter, and this is all set down with around the access and treatment time guarantee arrangements through the government. So we've got to send another letter. So that adds another cost. Even though that appointment suits me and I've written down my diary, there's a letter goes out. And I have asked about that before, but it's just the way the system's set up, and we must send a letter out after we've confirmed that. Now, longer term, we've been looking at how can we move to an electronic base of working rather than just paper letters that are going out. That's not going to be an easy fix because some people still want that, but maybe some others people will tick the box to say, oh, I'd like to get electronic communication. So we're looking at that as the next step. But in terms of that we made a decision to move from first class to second class because we did maybe about a dozen areas. We did some testing, and I'm going back a couple of years ago. And we proved at that time that there was very little difference around the pilots we did around using first and second class. Now, that's okay if you've got a week, 2 weeks in advance or whatever, or even like 5 days. But if you're looking to, on a Friday, put something out urgently to get to a patient on the Monday, Tuesday, then I'm not even sure you could rely on first class for that. So there's something about alternatives that the service needs to think about. If it's last minute, how are you going to handle that? Because even with first class, it wouldn't be able to cope with that. So that would probably be feedback there. And why have I done this? Did I see a difference between it? There was very little difference between first and second class within a reasonable time frame. And I've got to say this, it saved a lot of money because the exponential increases I've said a few minutes ago that I've seen over the last 5 to 7, 8 years has been really, really big, and the budget struggled. So I've had to look at different ways. But as I also said, we're not alone. All other boards have looked at this, and I believe are running mostly on second class mail. So a little bit of a wide sort of answer there, but it wasn't a straightforward one. Hopefully I've been able to capture the key themes.
Quite interesting though, Paul, and I'd be really interested to know our plan to digitalise. And clearly, we don't want to exclude any citizens by using a digital approach. I would imagine we're excluding a number of citizens by continuing to write to them and posting. So I'd be really interested, not just now, Paul, but to understand that the plan to digitalise from a number of things, from a greener agenda, from a cost and from access, because that feels pretty outdated, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm happy to look at that a bit more detail. We have looked at it off and on for a couple of years now, looking at national solutions that were available, and we've never quite landed on something. If I think about my own kids in mid to late 20s, they would look like I'd come from the dark side of the moon if I said, we, as the healthcare, we provide letters for everything. They don't want that. They want electronic communications. So we've got a younger generation that has an expectation of that. But the fact that it's come up here again, it's not that it hasn't been looked at before, but it is on our agenda. I just need to ask where we are around the postal mail steering group that looks at these things. But I'll ask that question.
Okay, thank you. The next one's again anonymous. It relates to electric car charging points for staff. It says the person says that they feel there are very limited points on the Forester Hill site currently, and those that are rarely available to use. Also mentions that in the multi-storey car park, the points charge you in euros and have a 4-hour time limit on them, which again adds the stress of having midway through the day having to dash back to the car to find another parking space. The person, she's asked if there are any plans to install more Charge Place Scotland chargers in locations across ARI and other NHS Grampian sites. I'm thinking that's probably
thanks.
one for Paul, is it?
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to answer that one. So the answer is yes. However, there's a however comma around about that. So I touched on earlier around the greener ambition, sustainability, and net carbon zero. So as an as an anchor organisation, we've got to do our part in decarbonisation. So putting in chargers, yes, we want to put in more. The ones within the Lady Hill car park are, that was set up. So yeah, it's for 4 hours, but it was originally set up so for patients, visitors could come in and come to the hospital, charge there for a limited period of time and go, because they're not going to be there for an awful long time. There will be some that will, but in the whole, there wouldn't be. In terms of electrical infrastructure, so this, again, I mentioned about, this is a good topical question, so is this one. So we're doing, for the last couple of months, we've been looking at an infrastructure review around our electrical supply and capacity that we've got and I'll pick the Forest Hill site, for example. which is obviously still, I believe, the largest healthcare campus within Europe. So we're looking at the capacity there. We believe that probably if we start putting lots of charges, we're probably not confident we'll be able to provide that supply. So we're doing a review with an external organisation. To do that review, it'll come up with a plan. We'll look to see what the funding is to put these charges in, upgrade the incoming supply from the grid to supply that, and get a plan round about that. So hopefully that helps answer that. Absolutely on their agenda. We are doing something about it because we have to, as part of the Scottish Government's strategy and targets that have been set down.
Okay, the next one's an anonymous question from a colleague in Murray. They're asking if there are any plans to clean the front of the main entrance at Dr. Gray's. They mentioned the signs, the windows, and the paintwork are starting to look a little bit tatty, as they say, and it just feeds the perception that some people have that the hospital is apparently being run down. They're also mentioning that they're grateful the old front door access has been restored recently, but they've also said the area around that could potentially do with some attention as well. Is that something that's on the agenda, Paul, from one of your teams?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So, firstly, we should be having our ground staff that regularly tidy up the grounds, including the front and what have you. So, I believe that's still in place, but I will follow this up after this recording to ask my colleagues around about that. And so I can do that. We've invested large sums of money over a number of years in upgrading the wards and windows and all sorts of things around the infrastructure. So no immediate plans beyond that. But in terms of how to look outside, tidying up, looking at signage and what have you, I'm quite happy for the team to have a look at that and then report back findings, taking any action where this is required. But the back of the building, which is the old clock tower bit, I'm very aware that that's needed some work done in it, and it was actually taken out of, well, you couldn't access that door for some time, but it's back now. We just need to make sure that the building's fit for purpose, etc. But overall, I'll ask one of my team to go and have a look around and report back. But I'm not aware of any immediate plans, but we should make sure that it's tidy. I think it should be getting done, but clearly colleague doesn't think that. So I'll make sure I follow that up to make sure that we're doing that.
Mike, can I just jump in? So I think Paul's given an absolutely the right response to that, but just to use the opportunity to restate that there is absolutely no downgrading of Dr. Gray's Hospital. In fact, the absolute opposite. We have just commissioned the strategic plan on the back of the Scottish Government agreement to support the Murray maternity recommendations of Model 4 and then Model 6. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then that's about the strategic plan for delivering maternity services across Grampian and in particular for women and families in Murray. And to enable us to deliver Model 6, there requires to be a comprehensive strategic plan for Dr. Gray's as a networked hospital. So a really exciting piece of work that will be completed by the end of this year. And that absolutely sets out the critical function of Dr. Gray's in our health and care system for the local population of Murray, but also wider in Grampian. So just to restate, I know there sometimes is a narrative around downgrading of Dr. Gray's, and that is just absolutely not the case. I think for the colleagues that raised this, I mean, Dr. Gray's is a beautiful building. It's the facade of it is absolutely beautiful. So I can understand the desire to have work done to make it as aesthetically pleasing as possible. And that would be great if we could achieve that. However, in the world that Paul is living in and the priorities have to be about keeping colleagues and citizens and patients safe when they are in our care. So there's a real balance of aesthetics and actually making sure buildings are safe to function, and all of that is costly, and that's what Paul and the team have to prioritise all the time. However, I would agree that being able to walk through the front door when I was up most recently was great, and it feels like a small step, but clearly a big step. So thanks for the question.
I think if I could maybe just sort of add in another comment there, because Caroline's absolutely right. And if we think about the kind of site development of the Dr. Gay site, so we're just about to start up a group that will be responsible for looking at the future planning, infrastructure planning of that site, chaired by the hospital manager. And that should start soon. But in terms of our immediate planning, we're looking at a scanner, an MRI scanner going on the site there, and adjacent to it within Ward 4, which is the mental health unit ward, we're looking at refurbishment, upgrading of that ward. So there is lots going on, as Caroline's saying there. So it's right at the heart of everything we do in Grampian in terms of service provisioning. It's not there out on the edge. It's very much at the heart of everything we do. So probably worth me just adding that as well.
Okay, I promised people that I wouldn't keep you any longer than 10 to, so I probably need to call a halt there. The only thing is there's 3 more questions that people have been waiting a little while for, and I wondered if...
Mike, just do it.
Just go, do you think?
Paul's next meeting's with me, so it's only... So
we'll just go for it. Okay, well, grateful for that. So the question is... this question's about shuttle bus services for staff. The person has asked whether, it's actually a couple of colleagues have asked this, when are we going to reinstate the shuttle bus service? And if we are going to start it again, would it be possible to start it again earlier in the morning to help staff get to work? And then they've somebody else has followed that up with another question asking about the locations that they run from, highlighting the potential benefits of having alternative routes from the city centre, from the train station, that would help people link and get to ARI a little bit easier. Is that, Paul, one for you to start with?
I'm quite happy to reply to that. So thanks, Mike. So in terms of the shuttle bus service, no immediate plans to reinstate that because we're still working in line with COVID messaging at the moment. However, we probably will look to review this in the next 4 to 6 weeks. We've reviewed it before, but as I said, it needs to fit in with that messaging of where we are around COVID. So we'll review that in the next 4 to 6 weeks. In terms of any planned changes, and again, it's back to the car parking review. As we've learned things along the pandemic, do we need to take the opportunity to look, review and change the service when it is maybe reinstated? I say maybe because I can't say yes or no at this moment in time. We've got to look at that, but then look at the timings, the frequency of it, etc., and that'll be part of a review. But I would like to finally say that the shuttle bus service was set up to go from NHS Grampian sites, and I certainly would have no intention of looking at a multiple drop-off point, pick-up point. That would bring its own set of challenges beyond where we had before. So before we were running from the likes of Woodend Hospital down past Forrester Hill to Cornhill Health Village. That was kind of the route and a straight direct line down. We could look at alternatives, but by doing that, would we have enough vehicles for that? There's then the costs of running that service, etc. But primarily, it was set up to go from one NHS Grampian site to another, so probably worth just highlighting that.
Okay, the next question, it's again anonymous. They're asking if NHS Grampian have considered introducing a park and ride service for staff, specifically those working in Aberdeen who live in Aberdeenshire, which would obviously potentially help ease congestion on the site, on various sites, I think, and help the environment. But we've also had the same question from another colleague about a potential park and ride outside Elgin that would help people access Dr. Gray's. I don't know if that's anything that's been considered before.
So yes, we've got no plans for that. However, we did previously set up a a service during the construction of the Lady Helen car park. And the reason we did that is because if you think about the 7-8 stories, whatever in there, the footprint we're working with meant that for the duration of that construction, we removed, whatever it was, 150 spaces for the duration of that. So we put on a park and ride service for the duration of building that car park. I have to say, the service was not used. It cost quite a lot of money and it wasn't used. And even with there is the park and rides that are distributed around the city. So from memory, we've got one at King's Wells, Ellen, out by Chapelton, Newton Hill. That's the ones that spring to mind that are set up by the council to operate. But I've got no immediate plans, and for a number of reasons. But firstly, when we set it up before as you could call it a trial, but we set it up because we're building a new car park, but it wasn't used, Mike. But it cost a lot of money, and I know that the bus services are really challenged to get people to use the park and ride. I think now the city centre zone, green zone's been set up within Aberdeen City. That could end up having an impact, and maybe we'll see the park and rides. But it's not in my immediate plans to set that up, and I have to be honest, I'm not sure that it's affordable for us, because if one person uses it, it costs a set amount. If 50 use it, it's a set amount. But I have to say I was quite disappointed that there wasn't the uptake of it, because I think people still want to use their cars. By and large, some won't, but some will.
There is a really interesting theme here, isn't there, around net zero, around convenience, and actually the challenges of, and we've said this before, Mike, in these sessions, people just need to get to their work. They need to drop the kids off or participate in other caring responsibilities or other things and get to work and then get home as quick as possible. So there is something, I think, about, it's all linked, isn't it, Paul? Whether it's bike locking space, whether it's electric points, whether it's car parking, whether it's shuttle buses, whether it's park and ride. These are these all part of the transport review that you were describing?
They're all part of that wider sustainability agenda and travel and being green and active travel, etc. But as I said, it's certainly not in our current planning to look at that. But, it could be looked at, and with discussions with the government and other like SUSTRANS, NESTRANS, that there could be opportunities there to work with our partners. But so we can take that on board for consideration, but there are no immediate plans. I need to be honest and say that.
I suppose it's just about being able to say we've looked at this and revisited it as an option to reduce the footfall or the car fall, the wheel fall on the Forester Hill campus or the Dr. Gray's campus, and excluded or included because of these things. But it is, Mike, the point that Paul makes, it is a really important one around trying to make strategic decisions and engage with colleagues, and then the behavioural change that's needed to actually make that shift is significant. So I think the country has a massive challenge on its hands in regards to net zero, and it's the right challenge, of course it is. But really keen that we support Paul and the team in making the review meaningful and understanding what all the options are and what we will and what we won't move forward with.
Okay, thank you. These are two questions that I'll kind of roll together. Both of them are anonymous. One colleague, because I think it will be the same answer to both of them, one colleague has asked if there are any plans to reintroduce car share parking spaces at the Forester Hill site, and another person has asked if vehicle parking has been considered as part of the Baind and Anchor development, and the impact that could have on that side of the Forester Hill site. Would I be right in thinking, Paul, again, that would come under the ongoing review?
Yeah, absolutely. So we would want to, again, COVID messaging, where around COVID messaging and car sharing. So absolutely, that'll be part of that. We had that previously. There's no reason why we should be having that, taking that forward, because that's the right thing to do from a greener sustainability, net zero carbon reduction point of view. So absolutely they'll form part of it. The second part around the Baind and anchor. So where people were working previously might change because they go from one, say the east part of the site to the west part of the site because they were Matty, and that will move to the Baind Family Hospital. And that might displace in terms of, well, I used to park in the east, but I'm now looking to park over in the west part of the site. And there are no plans other than there'll be a fixed amount of spaces, and staff, in terms of getting access to parking will adjust accordingly around the zones wherever that they have access with their parking permit. So not plans as such, but we'll take it into account that that'll have an impact, but staff will probably just have to adjust themselves around getting access to that. And I say this with a cheeky smile, but maybe walking an extra 100 yards, maybe that contributes to an active day if you've got a sedentary job. I say that with a little smile, but I think we'll just have to readjust around the spaces that are available on the campus.
There is, Paul, just for clarity, because you and I have both stood in it. There is a car parking space at the bottom of the Baind, isn't there? There's, I think it's for families, but there is. I can't remember the number of spaces.
Yeah, so there's undercroft parking and that'll be for ambulance access, getting in, families, etc., to get access to lift to get up to the Baind Hospital because they've got a need of service there. But beyond that, it wouldn't be like a bit of large staff parking facility or whatever. It's not got that many spaces, so that's for that. But there are a lot of spaces on the campus, and it might not be at times as close as you'd like to be. But if we get this review right and we get the ratio right of who can access, etc., with the permits, it should sort itself out.
Thanks. I think it's just people being able to consistently feel assured that when they go to work, they're not going to have the stress of an extra 20 minutes darting around trying to find a space. So if the car parking review helps with that, I think it will be hugely welcome. Anyway, I'm conscious of time, and thank you.
Mike, just before you finish up, there was a couple of things come into my mind there while you were just asking that. And you mentioned the multi-storey and other car parks. Paul, I know you've been working on this. Are you just able to give a kind of update on the CCTV stuff that's come out of the Q&A, please?
Yeah, happy to do that. So we've started a review around the security, and we did one about 3 years ago, so it was due to do another one anyway. And as part of that review, looking at the team, the size of the team, are they fit for purpose? Because yes, they'll do walk around to security, but they've also got other duties like violence and aggression and things. So in response to things that arise and incidents that arise over the sites. So we're looking at that, but we're also looking at the security CCTV, twofold. The technology we've got that looks at that, so the cameras, the monitoring equipment, and also do we need to be adding cameras into areas that perhaps don't have that at the moment. So that's going to all get encompassed into the review, and in due course that will come up through our governance structure to the appropriate meetings to discuss that and see what we want to do about any actions that come out of that recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I will just finish up there, and I'm grateful for an extra 10 minutes or so of your time, and I hope it doesn't cause too many issues. I will just finish up there and say thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Paul.